Roll call.
Vice Mayor Pope.
Here.
Commissioner Lister.
Here.
Commissioner Hodges. Here. Commissioner Shantz. Mayor Palladino.
And we're going to bypass number 1 for the moment and go to number 2, discussion on soon to expire terms for members on city appointed boards.
Yeah, thank
Mr.
you,
Crawford.
Mrs. Vice Mayor. There's a enclosure in your packet just to let you know the boards that are or the members that are expiring on these boards. And if you remember, a year or two ago, we hadn't done a very good job as an organization of keeping up on these terms, and so we kind of corrected it and went on from there. And so we've got some expiring terms already. Candy Matthews, her term is expiring, and she just got a change in employment, and so we don't expect her to reapply. Bob Shaw and Pam Rasmussen on the Civil Service Commission, we expect both of them to reapply. We've been notified by them. And Peter Koselek and Marilyn McGinley on the Plan Commission, and we haven't heard from either one of them, but I think it's reasonable to assume at least one of those will reapply. So this is that opportunity you get when you've got constituents saying, hey, how can I get involved in city government? This is it. So the Civil Service Commission, they rarely meet. You've got a union that actually even decertified. We don't have to bring that group together very often. We meet once or twice a year. The library board takes the summers off. They'll start up again in September. They've got one more meeting left this month. So if you got somebody interested, the library board would be a good place for them. And then the Plan Commission. So it's just an FYI, Amy's already started the advertising in the newspaper. We've gotten a bunch of calls on it. So that's about it. If you have any other questions or concerns, let me know, but feel free to direct them towards Amy or to my office, and we'll get them an application. Amy, the deadline to apply is
The 9th, I believe. No.
June 8th.
June 8th, which is right around the corner. So, and that is all. So, Madam Vice Mayor, unless there's any other questions, I'll go let the finance director know.
So are they 3-year terms?
Some of them are 2.
Summer 2.
Summer 2 and
Help me out,
one's.
Andrew.
Okay.
So when people ask me how
The
long-
library board's a 3-year term, I
Okay.
know.
The
And
civil
then-
service is 2 and the other 2 or 3.
So
Yep.
civil service
Yep.
is 2 years.
Yep, it's all in an enclosure in your packet there if you want to reference it later, but.
And applications are available online as well.
Yep. So we'll get that to the board in late June for appointments, Amy, does that sound about right?
I think we were going to do it at the first June meeting.
I can do libraries 3.
Yeah, we can do it. Yep, yep, so we'll get that done and sealed up, just one less thing to have to worry about, so. Any questions? Otherwise, I'll go get the finance director, and we've got some financial advisors that just
They're
want to walk
coming
you
this
through.
way now.
He's with us.
All set.
Hey, I guess you guys can park there.
Gentlemen, if you want to take these chairs here. We have a limited commission today. The mayor's got another obligation, and we've got a commissioner who's got an ill husband. So these are our 3 commissioners. Our vice mayor is running the show today, Elaine Poe, Terry Lister, and Nancy Hodges. This is our city attorney, Tom Trask. See, you got to help me with your last name because I always.
Marshall Barley.
Marshall Barley. I'm the city manager, and Amy's the city clerk. So you know the cast of characters, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I'll kick it off. And I'm excited these guys are here, but I think just the fact that we're here having this discussion is going to be a good thing for the city. So just to kind of go back in time a little bit, back in February, I think at the time I was providing a little bit of an update on the fiscal year 2014 budget and year-end process. And as part of that process, I started talking about some financial policies and some types of financial analysis that the City Commission ought to consider putting into a more formal, professionalized practice. I probably beat a dead horse, and I went through something like 10 or a dozen policies that we could potentially consider, and luckily the board stayed awake enough to give me direction to move forward on 2. The investment policy and a budget amendment / fund balance policy. I'll call it a budget policy for the purposes of going forward. And just so that everyone is, including the financial advisor team, is aware of our current policies in that regard. Right now we have no investment policy. In fact, the city formally repealed the previous investment policy a few years ago. That was before my time. I don't pretend to know why that that move was made. I'm sure there were plenty of reasons. But the fact is, so we have no investment policy, and that means that according to Florida statutes, there are certain investments that we are authorized to make and certain investments that we are not. But regardless of what the authorized investments are, there's of course no policy or practice guiding me in terms of what level of concentration I may want to consider among various institutions, or the term of various investments I may make. There's no guidance I have in that Florida statute document. So just keep that in mind, that we're essentially starting from scratch when it comes to investments.
So are you asking for guidance from us?
No, I mean,
No.
I will, and I'll get through that, but my goal today is by no means, I'm not expecting you to come up with any types of recommendations at all today. Kind of hoping this will be more of an orientation type session for all of us, and then going forward, we'll get some more direction. But then on the budget, and what I'll call the budget policy, we have no real formal policy there either. In fact, I think the language that I've incorporated in a few budget documents and CAFRs it reads something along the lines of, the city has historically earmarked a third of its budget for hurricanes or whatever, which is great, but
That's the way they used to do it.
and that's fine, but it's no real policy, and what I'm left with is, what does that mean exactly? So the city is going to earmark a third of its budget. That's great. Well, does that mean we can spend down to a third of our general fund budget? I don't think that's probably prudent, but maybe it is. I don't know. We haven't had the discussion. So ultimately, that's what we're trying to get to is, let's have the discussion. Let's go through the analysis. Let's go through this kind of deliberative process of staff bringing some options to you, you guys talking about them, discussing them as a group, and then you tell us how you feel about them. These are, at the end of the day, these are not administrative policies, which is why I can't just go to Shane's office and say, hey, I think we ought to have a fund balance of X, and he says, yeah, sure, that's great, let's make that happen. That's not how it works. These are governance policies that we're really trying to implement. So that's why it needs your support and your direction. So really, my only goal for today, I'm not planning on anybody walking away from this discussion with anything formal in mind. If I could get you to just consider some ideas like, where ought the city be heading in the future? What direction are we trying to establish? Where should we be in terms of financial projections? I mean, those are the types of things we should be considering about when we leave this, discussion today. I think what I have in mind in working with David is that at the next meeting, maybe we will, at that point, have some actual policies and examples that we can provide. Maybe some policies that we think look good, maybe some that we think are not so good, and just talk about those. And I don't know if I'm getting too far ahead, but maybe at that point we could get some consensus from the board to move forward on one type of policy versus another, and then the following meeting, so 2 meetings out, maybe we could adopt the policy. And the timeline, I think, works well with us because right now I'm going through the budget process. Shane's going to be presenting the proposed budget to you on July 1st. I think it makes a lot of sense to be doing all this in the exact sequence that we're doing it. Not to mention we're also planning the next debt issue related to stormwater projects in the next couple months. So the idea is that we are going to tie all these processes together. And I think that's going to work out for all of us. So that's kind of the idea I want you to take away from this. But I also want to make sure that we're aware that there is a real need for these policies. There's kind of a broad conceptual need for them. Shane has kind of talked about the idea of like a new Madeira Beach, right? We're doing all these new projects. We're adding services. The city is kind of reinventing itself in terms of the services that it's offering, and that seems to be working out well for everybody, right? I mean, everybody's happy about the projects we're doing. But where does that leave us exactly? We're placing all these resources into service, but at a certain point, do we have to protect a certain amount of those resources? Do we really want to exhaust everything down to that 1/3 general fund level. I don't know. Just talking about this kind of conceptual need for these policies. The city has put some money towards my personal career. The city has invested in my career by sending me to these GFOA trainings. I've been working on my certified public finance officer license. In terms of a return on that investment, the city ought to be reviewing best practices. The city ought to be aware of, what are the industry trends in terms of financial policies and procedures. We're not trying to do things the old way anymore. So what's the right way to go about financing all these new activities? And then to get more specific about where we're actually heading, if you remember the last meeting, I was presenting to CAFR, and I said, if I could burn this one image into your minds, it would be this page 12 that showed that operating expenditures going up, fund balance is going down. That's fine. That's kind of what we're doing here. We're putting new projects into service and offering new programs. So that's what is going to happen. But at what point do we say, okay, that's where we're comfortable? We have a couple of big items coming up that may. We're going to have another debt financing very soon. Probably several. We may have a couple of revenue anticipation short-term notes that we're looking at. These are all pretty normal activities that the city can be doing and should be doing, but that are new to Meteor Beach. So without those policies in place, it may limit our ability to do those types of things. In fact, when we got our rating from Moody's when we went through the bond process a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and one of the trends that they identified as a potential weakness on the city's part was that it was significantly using reserves going forward. And that's not necessarily a problem again, but it is a problem if there's no control. So that's why we have a need for all these policies. And then ultimately, I think, to tie this whole thing together with the stormwater financing that's coming up, the budget, the policies, I think my goal, and I'll say this publicly, I don't mind, is that I think my goal is that when we go to issue stormwater bonds in the next couple of months, we should have the policies and the documents in place that the credit from the city's stormwater fee is strong enough that we don't have to use, for instance, the revenues that we pledged on this City Hall project. My goal would be that the documents that we prepare, the policies that we prepared, could be so strong that the stormwater projects are able to stand on their own with no additional types of liens on other revenue sources. And we'll, of course, consider whether that makes sense or not at a later date, but if that's the goal, then that means between now and then that we have some real work to do, and B, if we do that work effectively, then we have some real success that we can actually look at and say, here's how this policy helped the city. So that's kind of everything that I wanted to hit on. I hope that kind of paints the picture of where we're at for the new guys and for the city commission. Where I want us to head, and it matches your interest and Shane's as well, because yes, we're trying to do all these new activities, but everyone also has a goal of making sure that long-term the city's interests are protected. So with that said, I'm going to introduce the guys from PFM, Public Financial Management, I guess is the acronym. They currently work with several other cities in the county: Oldsmar, Tarpon Springs, St. Petersburg, Longboat Key. I have specifically worked with David over the last few months. I met David as the city of Dunedin was going through the process of, I think, refinancing bonds on a couple of stormwater projects. So, oh, that's right, okay. And Tom has worked with David in that regard as well. Point being, he was working on a similar project for a nearby city, so it's nice to have that familiarity. David has worked in the past over in Colorado. He was the CFO for Denver Public Schools. I think held similar positions for City and County of Denver. And again, has the experience here in town working with the City of Dunedin. So with all that said, I just kind of want to hand it off to these guys. They can offer any perspective on the city itself, PFM, what you bring to the table, and kind of where you see this going forward. Good.
Let me do the 2 second on PFM, and then we'll move on to what you care about, which is first. PFM is a national firm. In Florida, we've been the most active financial advisor helping cities, counties, school districts for 15 or 20 years. Our business is unique in that, as you referenced, we do both and focus on both small, medium, large cities. We learn just as much from small cities that help us with big cities as we do from big cities that help us with small cities. And so from the beginning, from the time I got to PFM almost 20 years ago, it's really been our focus to serve all the way up and down the population size. We have about 20 people in Florida that work in different capacities. Again, some school districts, some work in public power. We have an office in Fargo, that director right that way, that does just airports all around the country. So we have expertise that we get at whether it's stormwater or certain areas that we can apply to each particular client. Chime in.
And also, I think it's an important distinction. There are folks who and it's neither necessarily good nor bad, but just to distinguish PFM, we only do financial advisory services. There are investment banks that would be underwriters, and some of them also, not for the same client at the same time, but would provide financial advisory services. Excuse me. We do not. We are a firm that is dedicated to providing financial and investment advice to public entities, to echo the sentiments, without regard to size or market sector, but we're not an underwriter. And that can create some distinctions that to certain issuers matter, and we certainly think it's a strength of our firm because there's no confusion. Sort of to continue in that regard, part of our branding, I suppose, is that the rules and regulations that the Securities Exchange Commission and those that would govern the marketplace impose, they're asking issuers to be very clear about distinguishing underwriters as opposed to non-underwriting financial advisory. And the reason to make that distinction is not that there will be a quiz later. Terry, I see you're taking notes. So,
David, I'm just writing your name down. I didn't get this guy's name. I'm not getting started.
We're both David.
Okay, see? There you go.
You bet you already have it.
Yeah. 2 for 1. Is that we've always felt as a firm, and it's an interesting way that the industry is sort of catching up. PFM now legally has what's defined as a fiduciary capacity. We're not to be thought of as operating for profit. We're supposed to be operating to your best and highest outcome. It's a little bit, I don't want to oversell this here, but it's an odd circumstance where the SEC even goes so far as to say financial advisors, in theory, could work for free, whereas underwriters are always thought to be for compensation. That doesn't make them bad. I don't want to be casting dispersion, especially if anybody's like family members, the head of Goldman Sachs or something. That's not the point here, but it is to sort of reiterate the points, the sentiments that are coming through about the role that we're happy to be engaged on here, which is to be a firm providing advice to you. If I might, to sort of offer a little more context for that which Vince spoke to, we see the engagement as sort of multifaceted, and we view our performance as being the key to whether or not we advance. It's not a sign on the dotted line and we're good, evermore. This first issue is the policies, and I think it's a very important one that Vince speaks to in terms of giving you all the parameters. And I guess I'll look at both ends of the table, because as the city manager certainly has the day-to-day responsibilities, if you as the commissioners have the governance aspects of how to sort of balance between what might be thought to be the most laissez-faire, that's a convenient way to operate, as opposed to something that might be thought to be more conservative and controlling, heavy-handed. And we're going to do our best to strike the right balance. So when Vince talks about that we'll be coming to you, we won't throw 15 policies at you and say just pick one. We'll have some recommendations, and in those recommendations will be trade-offs, because that's essentially what you're being asked to do between the policy aspect of the commissioner and the day-to-day administrative responsibilities that the city manager and his staff have. And so we're going to try to help you find that balance. And that balance is a sort of a fulcrum that we're going to try to hit on all that we do. It's the issue between fund balance and what's the right level, and utilizing fund balance for prudent investments in the current as opposed to having it in the future, right? I mean, in our own homes, we are always trying to say, okay, well, if I spend it now and I need it later, I get the benefit of what I spend it now on, but then I've got a problem come later, perhaps. And so we're just going to help you work through, is it a percent? Is it further designated? Because that's what essentially your fund balances can be, from, in layman's terms, free and clear, if you will, to a highly constrained fund balance. And we'll help you both think about what's the right levels in terms of dollar and percent, and under what conditions, if any, you would release those during the course of the year or what have you. And that fund balance will also play into your budget process. Yes,
So we're gonna get that input on a semi-annual basis, an annual basis, or a monthly basis?
That would be something that you in the policy, and so it's sort of, if you will, think of it as, you've got your legal structure, and then the policy will fall out underneath that. Policy can't go broader than the law would allow, but it can qualify. And in those qualifications, the policy would be at a board, and I mean small b board, whether you're Board of Education or a city council or commission or county, there's that individual entities legislative board of directors type level that can then say, okay, given the legal framework, how do we want to apply that? And then from that, you can ask of your leadership how to report on that compliance to you. Daily, monthly, weekly, annually, whatever the case may be. And sometimes the budget document serves a multifaceted. By approving the budget, there will be representations that the CEO, in this instance the city manager, and the finance directors, your CFO, will essentially be making an assertion to you that it's everything that you're about to approve is in compliance with the law and the policies, in this instance, federal and Florida statutes, as well as the policies you might adopt.
Which can be stronger than federal law.
You certainly
Obviously
can get
stronger, not
stronger.
weak, yeah. So, well, the problem I see is the percentage basis, we are ever changing. I mean, almost daily. So it's gonna be tough to get that percentage in the beginning. I think we're gonna have to go with some real numbers and find out exactly how much we're gonna be making off of much of our park. Because it's a lot of new funds and a lot of new enterprises within the city, along with the cost of what it's gonna cost to maintain City Hall. We have no idea. I mean, we do, Justin do not have any idea.
Right.
But it's gonna be a change.
That's right.
Number.
And
it's gonna be hard for you to say 5% or 15%. Because I'm saying your job's gonna be harder than you think.
Well, I hope not, actually.
Because we're a moving target, you see?
I
It's
do
easy to hit the
appreciate
standstill.
that. I do appreciate that too.
But that's a good point, because one thing that we've made a very obvious change to the budget in the last couple of years regarding parking, John's Pass,
Yeah.
and the impact of that is to essentially provide a new, very, very liquid revenue source to the city that has worked out great for being used for projects and services that the city can quickly make a decision. We have the flexibility and, more importantly, the cash to redirect these funds and to do this with it. And that flexibility, I think, and I think Shane would say, I think this is kind of the reason the city has had some success of late is because of that flexibility. So I guess let's just keep in mind that the goal is not in any way to limit that flexibility, but to maybe put into words how that flexibility really ought to be shaped and how we can make it more of a formal policy while still achieving the city commission's goals.
Again, I agree with you 100%, but in the past, I've been a part of the city for quite a while. It was wait till I save the money before I spend it, and we never got there. You know, we have a stormwater plan from 2000. It wasn't paid for because it was too expensive. We never got there. We didn't have the foresight to hire somebody and borrow the money and pay for it over a period of time.
Well, I think
So I'm
that-
just saying, we're changing the whole substructure of Madeira Beach, which is fantastic. Again, I am so excited the way Madeira Beach is going, but it's just gonna be totally different for everybody that's out there that lives here. You know, once we start, if we start using their militaries for projects, they're gonna say, you know, I can't see that. I can't, you know, my children never, play there, that type of stuff. And I'm not trying to constrain you in any way whatsoever. I'm just telling you, there's some hurdles out there, and I'm sure you have to deal with them every day on a city level, Dunedin
Yes.
and other
Yes.
places that you guys work at.
You're-
But Madeira Beach is brand spanking new. I mean, it's really going in a direction now that it hasn't been in before. We haven't had a debt service since 1970. I can't, seven, seriously. I mean, this was new territory for us, and it couldn't be better right now. And everybody's happy, so we just don't want you to make anybody mad.
That's
your no question.
We gotta rock that, we don't wanna rock that boat, I get it. Well, I'll use the investment policy as an example. To say that you don't have an investment policy, adopted by yourselves, I guess is a fair statement. That's not to say you're operating without a policy. Statute now has imposed its policy onto you. However, to your comments, Jerry, as you sort of look into 12, 36 months down the road, and if you're doing one or any of the multiples of the financings that Vince has spoken to, you're gonna wanna treat the proceeds from the borrowing that you do during a construction period, then the fund balance that you might have in your general fund, which will be treated a little bit differently. I'm not talking Mars to Venus kind of differently, but there will be more than just a shade of gray difference between your operating funds, those funds that are reserved for operations but you don't expect to spend, as opposed to your capital funds. And then depending upon the ultimate, it's sort of like a Rubik's Cube. On one side you look at it and you say, I got a differentiation by my fund type. Well, I turn it over and I got a differentiation between operating and capital and immediate versus long-term. That Rubik's Cube you're telling me is constantly moving.
Comes
We
from the
gotta
same
keep
place.
getting it back to where we can look at it and make some informed trade-offs. And the policy is just that. It's not a law. It's ultimately a guideline. What you're trying to do is protect for sort of a prudent man principle. The actual dollars, how much by dollar, is it a number, and a percent, because you'll want to do a little bit of both. You'll want to be mindful of, you have a fiduciary responsibility to the citizens. They don't want to see
several times.
Right, I'm sure they do. They don't want to see you
that's my
build a
money
fund
that's-
balance to pay for something later, because that means that's money they don't have today.
Gotcha.
And yet at the same time, if you don't have a fund balance and something does happen, a hurricane, which aren't, it's not like you've never had that before, they're gonna look at you as not having been prudent if you didn't put some money away. And so you just gotta strike those, we gotta have those conversations, right? And so that's the piece where we're in this tranche of work we have some policy work to do. We need to help a little bit on the capital planning, so that can help you then inform Vince and Shane and as a staff, and then coming forward to you, how is it that this plan will look something different in say 2018 than it did in 2000, right? So how do you go from a proof of concept into production, if you will?
That's it.
And what are the, and there are times, and today may be one of those, and it's again your decision, but an advice to you is to recognize rates are at a very low point when taken on a historical context.
Right.
Been saying for many years, rates are going up. They haven't, but we keep thinking rates are going up. But regardless of
Sooner or
whether
later, the
they
Fed
do or
will
don't,
move it off of zero. We know that.
if we go back 20 years, they
Right.
look markedly different. And
Considerably different.
and the
yes.
life cycle of the assets that we're talking about, stormwater, streets, are going to be in existence, hopefully.
So if you're gonna
for
spend it,
20
it's time
years
to
plus.
spend it now.
Or borrow it now.
Or borrow, which we just
Right?
did at 3.5 to
that's
1.3.
those are the things where we're gonna say, okay, if you're doing X,
Right.
does it make sense to borrow now or use your money now?
Alright.
And there are pros and cons associated with those
Can I
choices.
quote you on that?
Yes.
I can,
And
that's good too.
There will be trade-offs that you'll have to make based on what you think you're gonna be doing later, what's your growth patterns. I mean, if you're a growing entity, you look at it a little differently than if you're declining.
Absolutely.
And we just gotta dig into that. So you'll have policies, you'll have some financial capital plans, all that comes together, you adopt a budget along with the resolutions, presumptive on my part, but we're an optimistic crowd. Then you get your budget done and those policies are done, we're also looking at the requisite documents for the financings. And we may structure the financings that come where your future financings may take out your current ones. Because at some point it may get large enough. And we gotta protect sort of the flexibility and the optionality, so that any choice you make today, which I think is why Vince is saying if we can, it'll be a standalone credit, because that preserves for you at a later time to use any supplemental liens or credit features to enhance subsequent debt. If we have to use it, we have to use it, but we want it to be an informed trade-off so that you know. And that's what we're
Well,
trying to
you
get.
can't use the same revenue for two different debts.
You can if you create a subordinate.
Oh,
It's
okay.
not,
What
it's
we
not
did on
like
the- on
a
the
second
latest one.
mortgage or a
Okay.
third mortgage, you know. And with that, as you might think about it, go down on that second mortgage, is it gonna be the same rate as your first? No. Is
It's-
it different
it's gonna be a-
conditions on that? I mean, and I'm using a silly example, but it's one we all live with.
I understand that.
And so you can, but there are costs to it, and we wanna make sure you're informed.
Fantastic. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you're from Denver, Denver schools? And how long have you been in Florida?
In Florida, about an hour. So I still work out of Denver,
Pinellas
David
County.
and his staff.
Where we have anticipated revenue coming from Pinellas County. Sometimes they work well with us and sometimes they
Right.
don't. So the anticipated revenue from the state or something after a storm. So when we have our first storm, and it'll happen sooner or later, there'll be a
Right.
storm. So, you know, people just need to feel comfortable that they've got that little nest egg waiting to take care of it.
Right.
So really, that's pretty good.
Yeah. And
Let
that's
me just
part
say,
of
I mean, interrupt you. Let me say one more point just to what you're getting at, because I think it's.
I'm not grilling you, Ben.
No. This is
This is not grilling. I'm good at that.
But you mentioned, you know, what we have right now, the flexibility.
I mentioned the county, you know I mentioned the county.
Yep.
Okay. My problem with that being is they don't have to give us that money. I mean, they said they would, but they don't have to. You
Right.
told me yourself,
Right.
Terry, it's a possibility.
There
Might
is
be,
a-
that
there
it
is a
might be
small
that
possibility
they will never
with
give us
that.
that money. I said, I will go get them myself.
I just want to make one more point,
Okay.
which is that, yes, the policies are very important to have in place now because of all the new stuff we're doing. But the policies were just as important to have had in place 20 years ago. Because the whole reason folks, at least that I perceive people in Madeira Beach to be happy with what's going on now, is that for so long, fund balance built up and built up and built up. And
Yeah.
projects may or may not have.
Most of the time may not.
Right, so if there had been a similar policy in place back then, you know, so I guess what I'm getting at is the timing doesn't necessarily matter, it's more the process that matters, and that's what we're trying to.
I think that's a key point, to be criticized for using fund balance when you had a fund balance the size that you had,
Oh.
in lieu of projects just, let's just call it falling through the cracks, was not a criticism of administration or the board, it was just the hand we were dealt. But now we're getting to the point where if you wanna keep that flexibility of being able to do some things midstream and stuff, we gotta probably put some policy into place to keep that balance where we need to, cause we've probably run it to a level now where we need to bond or borrow or do what we need to do to
And
get it done.
to your credit, city staff, you increase the revenue exponentially. I mean,
Well, you guys wanna do a lot of stuff, we gotta
fun.
invent some revenue somewhere. Get all this done.
Yeah.
But,
No, I've always said that high and dry is gonna work sooner or later.
we're gonna get you, we just gotta get permitted, but, again, I didn't want y'all to say, oh my God, you know, we ran down the city's fund balance. You did, but that was part of the plan and probably a responsible play to run up a millage rate or to keep taxing for new projects or not do projects at all would have been just as irresponsible, if not worse. So.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's part of the trade-off too, is you're always managing for reputation.
Yes.
And, you
What
wanna
have you done for me
maintain that.
lately?
What's that?
What have you done for me lately?
Right?
Yeah.
Well, that's the point, right? You know, you get that fund balance and there's a little bit of reputation, and you're, even at, 4,500 folks, you're not gonna be able to keep all of them happy with regards to the fund balance. Some will want you to have none, and some will think it's too little.
And you get a lot of doom and gloom from, our forecast. Nobody has a crystal ball, and I'm not asking you to bring yours out, but, you just get a lot of.
Obviously,
naysayers.
we'll bring it, but
The
it's a
best
little
place
bit
to put your
fuzzy.
money is under the mattress. It's funny, you get a lot of naysayers. But, I'm
No, I think.
excited you guys are coming aboard.
Yeah, your point, you said a minute ago, this could be, I think you said daily, weekly, not gonna be daily.
Yeah, that's all.
But
No.
you'll find that in this next 6 months, but probably the next couple of years, you're gonna be looking at the policies more frequently than you will 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Because once you put them in place, get through projects, even though you're gonna keep doing other projects, you're gonna find that you've honed in on the right parameters. And when you start to bump up against either your fund balance is too high or too low or whatever, or your debt burden's a little too high or too low by the policy, that's the whole point. It may be 5 years from now, you won't have paid much attention to it, other than you're gonna build things into the budget document. And projects are gonna come up, and you're gonna be bumping up against the ratio, or you're not gonna be bumping up against the ratio. And so it's gonna be a very easy decision to say, yes, we should go do another $3 or $4 million. Whereas in the past, the only answer was, we got it in the bank.
Yeah.
Sounds like,
That's what we're
we got it
saying.
in the bank, we'll spend it, and then by the time you get ready to spend it, it's another 3 years, and things will change or whatever. So the point is, it gives you really, in many regards, greater flexibility, because you kind of set on the front end that these are the parameters we wanna work with. And if we're pushing the edge, you're gonna know that so far ahead of time, that you have the option to go in and changing that threshold if facts have changed. Or you're gonna know, we gotta think of a better answer, because we really don't wanna go past X. And you're gonna know that a year or 2 ahead of things, instead of walking into a board meeting to approve something
Yeah.
and start screaming at each other because something just doesn't feel right.
You're gonna tell us we'll draw that line in the sand.
Well, and it's not a hard, it's very rarely is it a hard line. It really isn't. You, as your policies change, as you have new revenues coming on board, your ability to manage more complicated debt, either having bans and different things and helping you get through, is enhanced. So it really is, it's really guiding rails more than it is, you gotta stay right here.
And you're gonna probably find, I suspect, I don't wanna risk what it sounded like Vince did, go through 15 different policies, but you will find that as you get into this, your rating agency or your external auditor or city staff will say, well, I was at a county meeting and somebody mentioned this, where's our debt policy? Or where's X? And then you'll create one with cause, but you also may have trade-offs. So for instance, you may have something that says, we want to see a fund balance, I heard what you said about percent, but let's just, for sake of discussion, say we want a fund balance of 15%.
Sure.
And the rating agencies will say, we'd like you to never fall below 15%. And you're thinking, knowing your citizenry, we'll never get above 15%. And so this is not one-to-one, and this is not exactly the right apples to apples kind of thing, but you could be in a position where if you were to let the fund balance go, your rating agencies might scratch their head at that, and correspondingly you're at risk, not that you buy a rating with fund balance, but to this scenario, let's just say, okay, well, we're gonna lower your rating a half notch because you lowered your fund balance. But you might have done that with intention to not lay off staff or otherwise provide an essential service, and knowing that you're gonna be able to cover your debt service, which would have more cost because the rating went down, because the cost will go up, that you're covering that as a user fee or in some other way. That's not, while we can put a lot more meat to that, that's not an unreal scenario that David and I have encountered. What are the trade-offs that we want you to be able to make an informed decision on collectively? That's our responsibility, is to make sure at the end of the day, we're not here to tell you what to do. We're here to help you make an informed decision, and then we'll respond to that. And we'll give you recommendations that are based on practices that are prevailing in the state, practices that the government finance officers, to being a national firm, we can draw on expertise from different markets, different sectors, so you'll get a real flavor. And hopefully, just in adopting those policies, we'll feel like you're making an informed choice that represents the values of your community.
This discussion's actually interesting. I'll bet, this is probably too far inbound, I'll bet 3/4 of the times we have a discussion about policies, it's not driven by what you're doing, which is we want to put in guidelines to help us manage our capital resources better. Whatever, that's just my idea. 2/3, 3/4 of the time, somebody's been through a rating process and they didn't have the policies, and so they call us and say, put this policy in place so they get off our back. And it really has no connection to reality. I mean, it's, stick 15% fund balance and, we'll run our utility system at 1.5 coverage or whatever. They just want that stuck in a policy on it and put it on a shelf. And
Don't want a rating.
Don't want to ever look at it again because they want to appease the rating agencies. Y'all are looking at it just the opposite, which is better. Here, we saw what happened over the last 20 years, and we weren't able to move things forward quickly. We're doing things, and we know we need some guardrails here. Out of that, you're going to have dialogue about rating agencies, but that's not going to be what's driving it. So that's fantastic. That's encouraging. A lot of times it's coming from the other side.
Is it safe to say that these policies, they can't be boilerplate for all small beach communities? For example, we look at Madeira Beach, where without tooting our own horn, we're trend setting, we're progressive, we're being redeveloped versus a town maybe on the other side of the bridge or whatever that might be a little bit more reserved and doesn't do the redevelopment and things of that sort. So I mean, the more progressive, the more action, the more spending, frankly, that we're doing. Those are the types of policies we'll be looking at versus the sleepy city with minor commercial, no John's Pass, no nothing like that. Correct.
Correct. You want it to reflect. You're not going to get away with a policy. I'm thinking about from a rating agency perspective. If you go say we're going to do all these great things, and so we're going to have zero fund balance. I mean, sorry, but
Right.
You're not going to get a good rating just because you've told them what you're going to do. It's not guarantee a good outcome.
Right.
But the point is, you have to take all those things into consideration. You would probably end up with slightly lower than average fund balances if you're doing your major investment in the community. That doesn't.
Which is not a bad thing.
That's a good thing.
Right.
That's a good thing. And so, but you want to make sure your policies, and that's why you update policies, frequently, maybe not every year, but more than once every 20 years.
Sure.
Because you go through waves, and if you're in a process where, in a spot where you're going to be doing significant redevelopment, and you don't expect those things to generate tax revenues for 4 or 5 years,
Right.
you're going to have tighter fund balance. And that's where debt often comes in, is it helps alleviate some of that cash flow pressure. But you don't want to have too much either.
Right.
So it's going to look very different. Somebody on, depending on obviously being coastal is a big factor. We had different areas around the state I went through, of course, some difficult times over the last decade. The good thing that came out of that is a lot of areas learned, here's what I got to have. I got to be able to write a check for $2 million tomorrow. That, I don't know, can you write it tomorrow?
Yeah.
Good answer. I mean, but there's places that didn't know that and got in trouble and couldn't get situations dealt with in a week because by the time they were ready to move, there was nobody to do it. And so, I mean, there's things like that that they know it's a fixed dollar amount, and then they have reserves beyond that. So those are the kind of things you want to build in there. What's our floor? What percentages do we want to have for other events? What cushion? You could come out of this and say, because we're being so progressive in spending, we want to have higher reserves than we really need in the long run. That's a pretty logical way. That's one way you'd say, 5 years from now, we'll bring our reserves back down. But right now, just in case something doesn't go right, we want to be able to react. We want to be able to just write the check. And I mean, that's a different way of looking at the same fact pattern. But that's part of the discussion. We're going to have over the next few months.
Part of what I would offer in response is there might be some instances where you're going to look indistinguishable. What might be one of those would be your investment policy. Growing or constraining, that one's just an issue of risk and return. And so one of the things we would caution is you don't want to be in a place where as a community, you're thought to be speculating on interest rates, right?
Right.
That's not an issue of your size, that's just, are you being, to be direct, smart, or risky? But where you might, as an example of the two policies, is your fund balance policy. Use a silly example, but to my time in Denver, at one point, Denver International Airport didn't exist. It was getting ready to come online, and there was a competing airport down in Colorado Springs. And they were talking about how Colorado Springs was growing so fast, and it was going to take away from all the employments at DIA. And what was interesting about this, they were all using percents. And they were saying, well, Colorado Springs is growing by 10%. And I said, okay, well, let's just use this as an example. And this is actually with a rating agency. I said, Colorado Springs is $1. And it's going to grow by 10%. At the end of the day, it's going to be $1.10. DIA is $100. And it's going to grow by 5%. Now, which one do you want to have an ownership share? And that's where the issue of percents and dollars, to your comments, you start to have to take that into account. You also, to your question, there might be circumstances where by policy you'd say, okay, we're going to agree to, making it up as we go, city manager has designate as discretion of the city manager to spend down fund balance by, for sake of argument, let's just say it's at 20%, down to 50%. And then you can rate some condition. If within it's an expected, reasonable justification could be built back to 15% within 3 years. And that would then sort of require a little bit of, well, where are you coming up with that, right? And if you've got we've got this development that's occurring, and so this is that investment, and that is our return horizon, and these things are going to happen, well, that starts to make sense. If it's just because I don't want to be the person that has to tell them no,
right?
You might be saying to us on the side, please don't give me that discretion.
I'm already saying
And that's,
that.
and I'm going to put that on the table because that's actually, I've teased with Vince a little bit about this. He's sort of got to be the conscience of the organization. He's sort of the target of all of the narrow point in that. That's hourglass, and we sort of got to create a little bit of a balance where there's some give and take in the respective roles of elected officials, the CEO and the CFO of an organization. And that's our challenge, and hopefully we'll be up to the task.
So you do your job well, you stay with cities 5 years, 10 years, forever, they just sign a contract with you? How do you guys do this?
My first client, Ormond Beach, is still a client.
There you go, glad to hear it.
23, I don't want to admit it, it's more than that.
Enough said, enough said.
And that's
I just
our
flash in the
approach.
pan, or do we get this right, and then you guys say, okay, now you get to roll for a while, or?
Well,
no?
it actually works the other way
I'm
around.
okay with that.
Because I've been on the other side. I've only been on this side of the table, if you will, for a year.
Uh-huh.
And on the other side.
You've been over here?
Yeah.
All right.
On the other side, you get to a place where you don't let anybody go if you believe they're telling you things true.
Oh, yeah, you gotta pay for yourself.
And if they're not, then you kick us to the curb.
Sure.
There are times in our business where you won't see us. We'll be talking events, but you might not see us for 2 years.
I'll find it.
If you want to, you're gonna see us. It takes me 90,
No.
it takes me an hour and 2 hours and 10 minutes to get here. You'll see me in 2 hours and 10 minutes.
Are you driving north or south?
I'm Orlando. So it really depends, actually.
Doesn't
this
take
is
me a
north
whole
side
lot
of
longer,
Orlando.
and I'm coming from farther away.
I'm the north side, so it could be actually about a 40-minute, depending on the traffic. But anyway,
Yeah.
you may not see us for 2 or 3 years because you're in a different spot.
Sure.
And we'll be, monitoring stuff and dialogue.
Terry, you set that softball up for me. I can't not hit
Don't
it
hit
off,
it,
but
don't hit it.
I will say that's a distinction between underwriting and financial advisors. Financial advisors look to have relationships over the long time. And that's defined more by the fiscal wherewithal of the community. That's not, some of my best friends are underwriters, I'm not taking that, but they're focused more on a transaction, right? There's a certain churn.
Yeah.
And that's because there's an event that speaks to the work that they do.
They're
And
done
with the
it. They're done.
regulatory environment
They're done.
getting further and further about you can't cross-pollinate, we're very much about trying to create long-term relationships. Because we believe that if we serve you well, no disrespect is meant to you all at this table, but I look at this end of the table, I know Tom, they're young, they're gonna move. I'm an example of
Not
that.
if I can help it.
And part of that is, that's how you build, you're a businessman, that's how you build businesses, on relationships. So
Sure,
if you
absolutely.
do a good job, then people tend to value you, and it speaks for itself. If you don't, then you're out of a job.
All right.
So,
Welcome aboard.
for the commission, what is the next step? So that they're aware of where we go from today.
My plan, and this David and I will have to be discussing this over the next probably couple of weeks. But my hope would be that at the next meeting, not necessarily at the next commission meeting, but at the next meeting where we have a financial advisor item on the agenda, that we would be bringing some options to the city commission. I mean, it's great that we've now had a couple of meetings where we've had this discussion, we've talked about it, but at a certain point, you need to know what we're actually talking about. So the idea would be, at least on my end, that at that next meeting we could present some options, and maybe over the course of maybe 2 meetings, be able to walk away and say, okay, here's what we're looking at going forward.
And I think we'll develop a calendar that will give you a sense of what deliverables are due in draft and final form. All not to be presumptive, but on the presumption that if we present policy A in draft form, it would be vetted, and then look at the clerk and city manager, that there's some process, Tom, that would say, okay, what's required in terms of vetting that in the public record, and when is it that you could officially act to approve? And Tom, my ignorance, I don't know if it requires 2 readings or 1.
If it's a policy, it can be done by resolution, just 1 reading.
So that right there will help on the calendar, and we'll sync that. You'll see if Vince will have it.
How is this being triaged? I mean, now we've got stormwater bonds that we're gonna have to go out for. I mean, is that bonding agency or that process dictating the triage level? Like, I would imagine
Yeah,
a fund balance policy would be one of our leaders, right? I mean, that would make sense, at least.
Yeah,
from
so the
chair that I
goal
sit
is
in.
that the 2 main policies are investment policy and what I call budget policy, which means fund balance and a couple other related items.
Okay.
And my intent would be that by August, or what did I say? If by August or September, the goal is to issue our first stormwater bonds, our next debt issue. And so everything is kind of working backwards from that calendar. So over the next, it doesn't leave us a whole lot of time, but between now and then, we'll be proposing the budget, we'll be proposing some policies for consideration, and ultimately we'll be issuing the next round of debt related to stormwater projects.
The other thing, and I don't know if these gentlemen can help us, I did this in my last life, is, when our property assessments come in, we now know what we can tax at. And the city could put a self-imposed tax that would limit us further than what that limit would be, but still would allow us to maybe collect more than what we're talking about. So basically, incrementally phasing in possibly a millage increase or a tax increase of some sort, based off of our new policy stating, hey, we're saying that we want 25% in reserves, but you already spent it down to 15%. How do you get that 10% back because you spent it on Archibald Park, or bad example, but whatever the case may be. So have you guys ever done anything like that in regards to almost a taxation type policy?
We can't use the ad valorem taxes for what we're talking about doing.
Gotcha.
But that would all be part of the
Of
process
the
here.
budget
I mean,
policy.
basically what you're asking is how to get from here to there, and
Right.
I mean that's.
Yeah, I think it's, fair to say yes is the short answer.
Okay.
We would obviously those 2 might be
Mhm.
working with us to, as a team to bring them forward that
Gotcha.
product, but there were ways in which you can create policies that have conditional if-thens.
There you go. I guess that's what I want to get to, at least the 3 commissioners today, is if we're going to say, hey, we need 20% in reserves and we have to get there, we either have to limit our spending or increase our taxation. I've been saying this for a long time because we've been doing a lot of great things, but we've had the money in the bank. We want to keep that flexibility. Now, if you want to continue to do great things, we got to take a look at doing that, but there's a careful balance there. You don't want to go too fast. We raised it very slightly last year, and hopefully we won't have to do it again this year, but those things all correlate. They're all part and parcel to get this done.
And those are, certainly from a policy perspective, the vetting of trade-offs associated with that can be part of a policy, I mean, it can be part of your compensation conversations with,
Well, we have a ridiculously low millage rate, and it's not ridiculous, but it's low, and people like it like that, but they're used to that, and now we're starting to operate like a full-service city that we are, and we're doing all sorts of public projects, and I think that evaluation will probably have to come into play again this year as to whether or not the public is palatable to, some sort of taxation increase if they know they're getting what they pay for, which, let's be frank, they didn't in the past.
You're what,
1.99. We went
But I think that was the first increase in
year,
20-some, 30 years.
And so the other full-service cities in the area are around 3, and I can't imagine what it would be like to have that type of flexibility, but we did because we had fund balance. Well, now, where does that shift at this point? And so I think that's all going to be part of this evaluation. So.
Tom didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I just know that we can't encumber the ad valorem taxes by this bond issuances.
No, that's not what I was
Okay.
saying. I was just talking about our normal taxation level. Our 1.99. If our assessment rates go up 7%, basically, we get to increase, X amount. Do we want to look at creating our own self-imposed cap that would limit us further than what that is, but still provide for growth, frankly, and phase it in instead of just going back at it? But it all depend on some of these policy documents and where we want to see it, our fund balance at.
And I've seen entities, some cities, mostly cities, more than counties, do, $500,000 for capital.
Right.
That's just the way they do the budget. Or they will come in and create what's kind of like a tax increment, just define it all themselves, and it's really just part of the budget.
Sure.
To say anything over 3% growth a year is just in the budget.
Right.
Anything beyond that is whether you're going to use it to help with fund balance or again capital.
Right.
There's different ways you can go.
Or pay down debt.
Right. So that's part of the dialogue that we can have. Now, my guess is that probably, that might happen in the next 2 months. Probably not. Typically that's round 2 a year. When you get everything in place, you've seen how it's worked, and you go, okay, now it's time to move on. We really want to institutionalize
Sure.
the commitment to capital, things like that.
Yeah.
You then also to that, I agree with David, it's sort of there's subsequent iterations, and communities will often do sort of call it different things, but we'll just generically call it a tax burden study, right? So if you were to increase from the 2 to 3, that's a full 50% increase. Well, it's only one, right? It's back to this dollar versus the percent. And then you'll want to see, okay, but how does that do relative to creating the competitive footprint? And if that's the only consideration, then that's a pretty straightforward one. But if there are differentiated sales tax or different types of tax, then and not intending this, I'll give you the contract later. Not intended to be the full employment act, but I mean they can get rather complicated,
Sure.
and it just depends to what level you want to go to be able to have those types of conversations. They're the right conversations to have.
But you're only 10% of their total mills then,
Right.
give or take. We've got clients on the East Coast that would be 40%. And so the point is a change for you all in the aggregate, in their total bill is nothing, a big change for you all. So I mean, that doesn't change the fact nobody likes the millage rate to go
Well, yeah,
up.
they don't like to see that, and then it's like, well, the city is spending money like crazy, so they're raising their millage rate. Well, when we got raised taxes, it was the cost of a Friday night dinner with your family.
I disagree. Some people came to the meeting and applauded our.
Oh, we did?
millage rate.
Yeah, we literally were applauding
Now, that
the
being
fact that
said,
we did.
people just need to be educated that our millage rate is in that floor tax specifically goes to the city. And our taxes are raised every year by, the school board. and
Everybody else,
everybody else.
except us.
And so it's others, and people think that we're the ones that are raising all of the taxes, and obviously we're not. And so the education needs to be that if we do raise your millage rate, and I'm not saying we're going to, that will 100% come back to the city of Madera Beach. And I said that over the diocese last year when we raised it 0.6%. And again, we were applauded for that. And I'm not tooting our horn. I'm just saying that the citizens of Madera Beach are smart enough to know that we're raising their millage rate, to take care of Madera Beach, and the others people, the county's got to be taken care of. But I've always had that issue with the county, and we'll learn about that.
Jerry, the thing I think you speak to is that you've got this Well, we want you to make that informed decision.
Sure.
So whether you stay static,
Absolutely.
step it up over some period of time, it's about your ability to stand behind that diocese and say, this is why. As opposed to, and no disrespect if that's what you did, it's been 20 years, that's sure valid, but you've also got to be able to say, what's the intended purpose and how is it you're not, because it's the value of your community that you're speaking to.
I'm not that old, I've only been here 8 years.
You just been around the block a lot
There you
longer.
go. I look like it, don't I?
All right, so everybody's on the same page, everybody's on the same sheet of music as to where we go from here. We'll work with these gentlemen and get some policy documents in front of you probably in the next 90 days, or at least close to it. And
That timeframe is good. It's not a relaxed pace.
No,
It's
it's-
very much doable. I mean, to get to doing the financing at the
Yeah.
end of that's, we gotta keep our eye on the ball, but it's very doable. You'll have plenty of time to review stuff and kick it around for a board meeting, so.
But we're not trying to get it done before budget. We don't have to, there's no deadline before budget.
well,
Well, we're trying to get the project started.
Stormwater bonds.
Before September 1?
Yeah.
We gotta
Okay,
go.
all right.
And you'll want to,
Late on that?
I presume, you'll want to have your budget adopted that contemplates the financing and not in a sort of way.
Right.
You want to know,
Yeah.
Wanna nail
because
that
this is
down.
what we're doing, and then they all sort of come together at that time.
Right.
Policy looks that way, your budget's adopted that, and your financing, and no matter which document you pull, you're not reading 3 separate narratives, you're reading just 3 chapters from the same.
It's good to give the same answer. All right. I'm with you.
Thanks.
Well, thank you guys for coming in.
Yeah, we appreciate you.
Nice to meet you.
All right.
Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you too.
Nice to meet you. So,
Don't let it get loose.
what's that?
Does anyone have anything else?
No, the only thing I do have to ask, the mayor did call me and tell me that he was going to be absent. I forgot, that was
Oh.
my fault, so he excused himself. He's at a city work meeting with fire chief in Orlando.
Oh.
I don't know. And then if there's nothing else, this meeting is adjourned at 3:04.
So you'll be able to do what needs to